we have not held a hearing to discuss NPR on any subject since 1999. We invited NPR CEO Catherine Marr, who declined to appear today.
I may be the weird guy that actually listens to NPR, but when you listen to it, it's very hard to describe it as objective. Please explain to us why you decided the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't a story. You know, the executive that decided this, that it was a pure distraction, is now the editor of USA Today.
I mean, I think our suggestion is simply take away the money and make it a voluntary contribution that you can check on your tax form if you would like.
They're only going to choose the point of view that they want. And they'll say, well, we included a Republican point of view. Is Liz Cheney saying the president's a horrible person?
Absolutely. Taking over NPR is part of their desire to drive what everyone's able to think and what narratives are allowed in our society.
Thank you to our witnesses who are before us today to testify on National Public Radio, NPR. I do have to note for the record that we invited NPR CEO Catherine Marr, who declined to appear today, to discuss NPR's alleged past efforts to pressure conservative and moderate voices into silence. I thought that you had some good points, and one of them was that we should do a regular oversight of what NPR is doing. And I learned this morning, I've only chaired for the last 2 years, but I've been on this committee for about 14. We have not held a hearing to discuss NPR on any subject since 1999. So you would encourage us to have more regular things so the pressure doesn't build up to the point that we're at right now. Would you agree with that, or is that what you're trying to say?
That's definitely what I'm trying to say, and I'm focusing on specific metrics that would encourage NPR to serve a broader audience. I'm not proposing defunding NPR. I find a lot of common ground with Mr. Erwin on this, right? What I'm saying, if NPR reports to you, and I'd put public broadcasting service in that same category, the PBS NewsHour.
And make sure you lean into the mic so it catches so the folks back home can hear you. I can hear you, but you can lean in. Yeah.
I would put NPR and the PBS NewsHour in the same category. Report on the demographics and geography of your audience to demonstrate and have an incentive to serve a broader audience. When Pew is the most neutral and respected, when it says 87% left liberal, that's disappointing.
Are you saying that you think we should be investing more in public broadcasting through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting under the Public Broadcasting Act?
I would advocate for an increase in public media funding if it's going to local journalism and local news. I think that we vastly underfund the public media system compared to the rest of the world. It's about $3.16 per capita per year. In countries like England or Germany, you know, it's $80, $140 per year. I'm not saying it needs to be at that level, but I'm saying a significant increase would go a long way toward helping us have more local journalism, and that should be the priority going forward.
Mr. Graham, I wanted you to speak some more. You build on your testimony about how NPR has changed over the years, and if you believe that it caters only to a select audience, and just what examples you might give from the past 5 years where you believe NPR has unfairly covered Republicans.
Thank you. The idea that Uri Berliner said, I counted 87 Democrats and 0 Republicans. To me, the 87 isn't what matters. It's the 0. Why isn't there 1? Why isn't there 2? You know, Pat Corton used to work at WTOP here in D.C., and the question was always, he was the one Republican in the newsroom. And what that meant was that sometimes when people were doing stories, they would actually ask the Republican in the newsroom, let me check on this, so I don't go off the rails. There's nobody inside the NPR newsroom, as far as we can tell, maybe it was Uri Berliner, who would stop NPR from going off the rails. You know, but what happens is, for example, White House reporter Tamara Keith at NPR goes on the PBS NewsHour. She says what's happening in the House is a reflection of a broader divide in the Republican Party, where there's maybe like 20% or 30% of Republicans who don't want to burn it all down. Does the Republicans here in the Congress think they want to burn it all down? That's part of the point. You know, you can say, well, I don't want to regulate the content, that's not my role. But on some level, this is an undemocratic public radio system that shuts out the viewpoints of people that aren't the regular audience. I am the regular audience. I listen to national public radio in my car. You know, I get upset listening to it. Then I go in and I write about it. I may be the weird guy that actually listens to NPR. But when you listen to it, it's very hard to describe it as objective. And I'm offended by the idea that by objecting to it, somehow I'm comparable to Putin.
Does a journalist's political affiliation impact their ability to produce fair quality work, in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, it should not. Obviously, every individual, every human brings their own biases to their job and their approach. But the job of a journalist, of course, is to go out and hear what other people think, to talk to sources, to evaluate the evidence. That's what we want our journalists to be doing. And then, you know, that's put out into the marketplace of ideas, and we can get all the different perspectives. So that's why that shouldn't be the starting point.
If my taxpayer dollars and my constituents' taxpayer dollars are paying for NPR, then it should be unbiased. That's the point. And when my Democratic colleagues are passionate and say, well, Fox News is biased, well, guess what? CNN and MSN is biased too, but the point is they're not publicly funded. That's the reason we're here. We're here because we're talking about taxpayer dollars, and when my Democratic colleagues say this is a waste of time, we shouldn't be talking about this, yes, we should. We're funding this. Yeah, it's only $5 million direct funds to NPR, but as was pointed out, all of the member stations have to pay in, and guess where those member stations get the money from? Well, they get it from taxpayer dollars through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, right? And so don't tell me it's just $5 million. It's a heck of a lot more taxpayer dollars than that. And so my first question is for Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, what accountability measures should be implemented to ensure NPR provides impartial coverage and serves a broader audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been the whole problem, as the chairman was saying, that the legislature doesn't want to sit there and listen to it. I think that a more regular hearing process would be important. It would be good for Catherine Marr to actually have to come up here and say, please explain to us why you decided the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't a story. You know, the executive that decided this, that it was a pure distraction, is now the editor of USA Today. He got promoted for that kind of news judgment. I'm not sure, other than some oversight hearings, I'm sure we don't want to have members of Congress do what we do and sit here and count minutes and seconds. But anybody who tries to do that is going to see, for example, yes, they're not covering Republican hearings. NPR doesn't want to cover Republican hearings, but they're going to give 45 hours to the January 6th committee, where the Republicans weren't even allowed to select their own members. It's not hard to figure out. Is NPR biased? Listen to it for an hour. It's not difficult to figure out. It's not rocket science. Just this morning, they were talking about the white bonus, that white people benefit from systemic racism, and we all have white privilege. There's a lot of white people in America who are like, I don't really like this story, and guess what? I don't get to speak. You know, a lot of these things, there's nobody in there to say, well, now for somebody who doesn't believe there's a defense of looting, now you get 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's a problem. I think oversight hearings may be just the thing to do, but you can see from the CEO not showing up, she's not ready to handle this. She doesn't take it seriously, you know. I know she just started, but she was hired because of all these crazy tweets, right? Yeah. They didn't disqualify her. They basically qualified her when she said, well, I see why people would riot and loot.
Well, thank you for your comments. And you can see from the hemorrhaging of people that are in the middle or conservative listening to NPR that it's gotten so left-leaning and so biased that the people have given up listening to them, and that's sad. It's a sad state of affairs, and I want to help try to correct it because I do want local news. I just want the news, okay? I don't want to hear somebody's opinion. And so, Mr. Erwin, you're with the Taxpayer Union, is that?
Americans for Tax Reform.
Oh, thank you, I'm sorry. How can taxpayer funding be used as a leverage point to encourage NPR to diversify its political viewpoints? I mean, that's kind of the gist of this hearing, isn't it?
Sure. I know we're over time, but quickly, there's been a lot of talk about the intimidation of journalists and that this hearing is the intimidation of NPR journalists. There's some truth to that. You know why? Because it's federally funded, and this committee has leverage over the news coverage that NPR is going to be capable of producing. That is wrong in a free society. In a democracy, you do not have state media. That is a dystopian, totalitarian, Iron Curtain style system. But what can be done to reform? I think that these other two witnesses have mentioned some great suggestions. The decentralization is going to be a great one. The focus on local news, regular hearings, more regular oversight. The last time in 1999 when this committee did have a hearing with NPR, by the way, it was over a scandal where local affiliates were sharing donor lists with Democratic Party operatives. So, I think that to call it a propaganda arm for the Democratic Party, it falls a little bit short. It's more of a money laundering operation for in-kind contributions to Democratic campaigns well beyond federal election regulation limits. But I think our suggestion is simply take away the money and make it a voluntary contribution that you can check on your tax form if you would like, and the disproportionately affluent people who do pay taxes will be able to make a contribution.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Just add that Catherine Marr comes from this world. She was previously the head of the Wikimedia Foundation. She is on the board of Signal, and she's explicitly said the First Amendment is a problem. I know her tweets have become somewhat famous, but she's one of their operatives, and absolutely, taking over NPR is part of their desire to drive what everyone's able to think and what narratives are allowed in our society.
So, Mr. Husock, how does what's going on at the national level affect these local affiliates who have good journalists that work hard? And how are they being, the bias at the national level seems to be affecting people at the local level?
Well, thank you for that question. I don't want to get involved in the bluegrass discussion between Kentucky and Southwest.
You need to turn your mic on. Sorry.
I'm going to avoid the bluegrass discussion between Kentucky and Southwest Virginia.
Well, there's not a discussion, it's fact. But they have good music. If you give Bill Monroe credit, it's fact. But you can't argue with the Stanleys either.
What's been happening at the local level at NPR stations is very interesting. More and more of them are understanding that the market failure that motivated President Johnson to start the public broadcasting system in the first place is affecting their localities. And more of them are specializing in local news. WNYC in New York is one of the largest news providers in New York City. And it's all over the country, Chicago, Boston. But these stations are also having to lay off because their revenues are down because they have to send so much of their money to Washington. So the effect is to make it more difficult for them to provide what the market is failing to provide. What the economists call market failure. When does government get involved? When there's a market failure. We are seeing a market failure in local journalism, and that can be a better role for local public radio, but not if they can't keep the money that we're sending to the CPB.
Mr. Graham, how far do you believe that NPR has strayed from that original mission to deliver unbiased reporting and news?
A long way. I think that this is, as the gentleman from California was suggesting, it's not hard to attempt a balanced story. Obviously, somebody could come to this hearing and quote the Democrat point of view and a Republican point of view. And this is exactly what we see so many times, is that they're only going to choose the point of view that they want. And they'll say, well, we included a Republican point of view. It was Liz Cheney saying the president's a horrible person. I mean, that's fake balance. But I think that it can be done. Balanced journalism can be done. Factual journalism without a lot of opinion can be done.
Are you aware of any internal checks and balances, that balance that you talk about, that NPR has in place to ensure that there is fair reporting?
I don't think there's any evidence of internal. They talk about how they have robust conversations about journalism inside. Obviously, Mr. Berliner was trying to provide that robust conversation. The point that he was making in his article was nobody was really changing anything. They would listen to him politely. Nothing changes. I can certainly say from listening to it, they're not attempting fairness and balance. They're not even close. We would acknowledge it if there was some attempt.
Mr. Erwin, do you feel that NPR reporters are objective, or are they actually an array of activists who are on the air?
They're definitely closer to an array of activists on the air. I don't want to paint all of them with the same brush because there are certainly people there who work really hard, and many of them are sincere and really think they're presenting objective information, but they come from a skewed perspective. I mean, they come from the type of people who listen to NPR. It's affluent progressives who tend to be in major urban centers. And I want to quickly note that there's been some conflating of the national and local affiliates in this hearing today. There's been a lot of talk about local news and the dependence of rural areas, like you mentioned as well. But as you've made clear, what we're talking about is the national public radio, not local public radio. And the people who staff that do not represent rural areas. They do not represent Mrs. DeJett's district, for example.
Give us your thoughts on that. And is Ms. Mayer a good fit to change course?
Oh, I don't think there's any intention to change course. I think that's why she was selected. It would be interesting to hear her try to explain, what it is that they're trying to do. Because when we listen to this radio network on a regular basis, it's quite clear. You can understand why the Democrats don't want to have a hearing about this. It works very, very well for them, right? You can understand why the gentleman from Free Press has to say he's not here to represent public broadcasting, but they are very closely affiliated and fight for the funding together. Obviously Democrats like the system exactly as it is right now.
Yeah.
And so the very least we can do is, yes, have the CEO in and try to explain who in there is doing anything to suggest maybe we should have a more balanced set of interviews.
Yeah.
Right? Let's have a more balanced set of journalists. You won't see anybody from Fox News on NPR.
No. And you would think that's what the whole point. If you're going to do unbiased media, then it has to be unbiased. Biased media is okay. Just admit it, though. MSNBC does not try to claim that it's unbiased. I don't even think Fox tries to claim it's unbiased anymore. It's just not, right? We've had biased media in this country since our founding. But if you're going to be a taxpayer-funded media company, you actually have to adhere to the principles of unbiased news broadcasting.
And without objection, the committee is adjourned.